how quickly it is coming into the circulation. So there's a very interesting study just from earlier this year that might help us explain why the fructose from an apple is healthy versus the fructose from an apple juice is not. And that's because they showed in the mouse model that low amounts of fructose coming in can actually be metabolized in the gut. The gut almost buffers the rest of the body and in fact converts some of that fructose into glucose, which can be used for energy. And that they only looked at two doses, so it's probably more complicated, but what they showed was at higher doses was when you get that overspill of the gut, and under those conditions you do get 90% of the fructose absorbed and cleared by the liver, where it can affect the liver. So I think there's a lot still we don't know about how fructose in different amounts and different rates of absorption and so on can affect the gut.
Thank you. Just one other question. Many of the speakers showed graphs relating sugar-sweetened beverages to weight gain. Can you speak more about what the relationship is to different body fat compartments? So, for example, when people gain weight on these drinks, is it visceral? Is it subcutaneous? Is there a preponderance of visceral over subcutaneous, more than you'd expect for a given amount of weight gain? Is it just weight gain? Is that what's contributing to some of the cardiovascular complication?
Right, yeah, not many studies have measured body fat depots or body composition. Some of the studies measured total adiposity, body adiposity, and those studies found that the proportion of fat gain is similar to weight gain. And some of, I remember one, perhaps only a couple of studies look at the effects of reducing SSBs on body fat among children. And it seems the reduction in body fat is strongly correlated with reduction in BMI Z-score. So, but animal studies and small intervention studies have demonstrated that overconsumption of SSBs and added sugar is associated with accumulation of liver fat and visceral fat. The question is whether that's completely independent of body weight or total body fat. It's unclear.
My crystal ball tells me that Kimber Stanhope may answer this question later, right? Mm-hmm. I think she's done some pretty remarkable studies on that, and I think my guess is she'll be talking about that later.
Right. Carolina?
Carolina Povian from BU. I really enjoyed all of your talks, and I'm a big fan of all of you. I'm going to become the devil's advocate here for a moment, even though I don't want to be, because I really truly believe that we should definitely tax sugar-sweetened beverages for improvements in health. However, I'm going to put my the Obesity Society hat on, and we've been criticized by WAF for not supporting the sugar-sweetened beverage tax in the UK as a society. And our stance is conservative because we don't feel that there's enough evidence to show that a sugar-sweetened beverage tax will reduce consumption, as you've shown in Mexico already. However, we don't have enough direct evidence that it's going to reduce the prevalence of obesity, reduction in obesity. So, right, so that's our issue. So my hypothetical question is, what happens, and I do believe we should tax sugar-sweetened beverages. I believe we should ban them. But what happens if we institute a worldwide sugar-sweetened beverage tax and we show a reduction in consumption and no decrease in obesity prevalence, in fact, a rise in obesity prevalence?
Right.
What happens?
So first of all, from an ecological level, it's very, what you're arguing is very similar to what people argued, that breastfeeding rates infant mortality was going down and breastfeeding rates were going down, and therefore why did we need to worry about breastfeeding? So the complexity is obesity is caused by many things. And our food supply is changing so rapidly, and the marketing and the sophistication of marketing is changing so rapidly. The number of meals are going up per day as snacking and other things are going up. So sugary beverages is just a piece of the pie. And when you drop 10 or 20% of a sugary beverage intake, you can't expect an immediate weight loss. You can prevent weight over time in children, but the industry has used often and said, well, you're not seeing an obesity decline in Mexico, therefore we should drop the tax. And we can show these shifts in the distribution of calories, like the distribution of sodium and so forth. We know what it will do overall on population level change, but at an individual level, in the short term, we can't expect these kind of changes. So your point is well taken. We need time and we need long-term diet change before we're going to see a lot of any shift in obesity and even in weight gain, but we're not going to get it from just dropping 5 or 10% SSB. We need much more than that. And we know that from the studies of our colleague Kevin Hall and from many others, that the physiological complexity of reducing weight is much harder than gaining weight. So we can prevent weight gain much easier than we can produce weight loss physiologically, and we know that as well. So I think that when we talk about these taxes and we talk about other things to reduce some of the consumption of the unhealthy foods, we need the right kind of substitute. Mexico with water is a perfect substitute. And so obviously over time, people have shown with that overall diet shift that you will see certain changes, but we're not going to see them in 2 days.
You know,
I guess I'd like to hear what, Kelly, what you have to say, because I guess I'm anticipating the industry reaction back at us, right?
Well, they have.
Yeah.
Right.
It has already happened many times.
Yeah, my sense is that the Obesity Society is destined to never have a voice in public policy with that stance. And here's the reason, that, as Barry said, there are a lot of contributors to obesity, so there's probably no single thing of any ilk at all that could push around rates of obesity just by itself. And so if the Obesity Society says we need proof that it's going to change obesity rates, nothing will ever meet that criteria, and the society will never have a voice in public policy. That's my own particular bias. And it would seem to me that with the strong links between sugared beverage consumption and obesity, that the logic that reducing sugared beverage consumption would help with obesity rates is not a big leap, and that the society should probably get away from this this ultimate standard and have a voice in public policy by not waiting for evidence that it will push around obesity rates, because nothing ever will.
But also,
By itself.
I think the other factor in this, I think, is it might be over-expecting too much of obesity, because obesity is just part of the equation too. I mean, there's multiple other effects and potential benefits. Frank reviewed many of them in terms of diabetes and cardiovascular disease, mortality, dendrocaries, and so on. American Heart Association has been extremely proactive in this arena, so they've taken it on.
Right.
So I think it's a mistake to just expect there may be a benefit to obesity.
Yeah, well,
in fact, we have made much better progress in terms of reducing diabetes incidence. In the past 5 to 10 years, there was about 20 to 25% reduction in incidence of diabetes. That has been paralleled with the reduction in SSB consumption. Globally, I think we can ask this counterfactual question: if SSBs continue to increase and the obesity rates, the slope would be much steeper, rather than saying reducing in obesity prevalence, we can talk about, the counterfactual situation where obesity rates may be going up much more quickly, much more steeply than the situation without the SSB reduction.
But it is a great question, and it's a question we get faced with all the time, and one that industry uses sometimes effectively to say, well, you haven't seen an obesity decline, therefore your tax didn't work. And the fact is, these are tiny taxes. The Mexican tax is a 10% tax on sugary beverages. That's not like our 50 or 100% tax on tobacco. We're talking about a rather tiny tax on something with zero benefits in the way of health. And so it is a problem we face, though, to get a big enough tax to make the effect, or in the case of UK, where they put in enough tiers with a high enough level that they've pushed such a level of reformulation that the sugar intake is going to go down even before the tax. We'll get to that level. We'll learn and find ways to move in that direction.
And also just the idea that obesity is so complex, and we know that there are so many hormones that come into play when you try to take, some calories away, that people with obesity will find the calories somewhere else. And so that because of all the processed food with sugar in it, taxing sugar-sweetened beverages may not get the effect on obesity that you want because of all of the other components in the diet.
But we
So
have
that's
to
where it's-
remember what Rick Mattis and Barbara Rolls have showed us, that when you drink water or you drink sugary beverages, it doesn't affect your food intake. So that if we substitute the sugary beverages like they have in Mexico for water, their food intake isn't being affected, but their caloric intake is, and there will be, ultimately, we know, some kind of a benefit. It may be on those children preventing some weight gain. It may not be on the obese adults, but it may be keeping the pre-diabetics from being diabetes. And that's the kind of thing that Steve Gottmacher and others in working in Mexico are showing some of these changes with modeling. And that's where the comments of Frank really matter. Sugar has lots of negative effects aside from the effects only on weight.
Thank you,
Okay.
Karen.
Thank
and,
you.
Yeah. Next.
Hi. Very high. Eva Greenthal. I'm a student at the Tufts Friedman School, and my question's for Dr. Gorin. I'm wondering if you can just speak a little more to the individual level or policy level, but specifically individual level recommendations for mothers as far as consumption of fructose during pregnancy and lactation.
Well, I don't think we have enough data yet. We've just published, we're the only ones who have published on that, so I don't think I can say with any degree of confidence that we have enough, although maybe Kelly, you have an interesting experiment I should go do to change that. But I think that's the direction that we're heading in, perhaps not through there's not formal policies, for example, on sushi consumption during pregnancy, but many pregnant women shy away from it because they know that it's not great for their baby. So it's also perhaps an issue of just shifting cultural norms and making women more aware that what they're consuming is affecting their baby. But it's a very sensitive issue because of nutritional issues during pregnancy, and I've lived through a few pregnancies myself, so I know that pregnant women don't have a lot of control over what they eat during pregnancy. So my first daughter had to, my first pregnancy, my wife had to have aqua fresca once a day at least. So, there's many of those situations. So we're dealing also with a very sensitive period for the mom as well.